So, Chapter 5 of The Undertaker, Last Ride documentary, came with a revelation, which is the name of the episode, and that The Undertaker has no interest in wrestling again. He wrestled his last match, which was the Boneyard match versus AJ Styles at WrestleMania 36. It was physically taxing on his body. He says, like, hey, this one match, taking 8 hours to film it, or, if you want to call it a match, taking 8 hours to film it was physically taxing, and it was satisfying the response that he got. He doesn't feel like he can top it, so he's kind of said like, hey, this is a fine moment to ride out on. And I fucking love that. I love that it's over, because a lot of people have wanted him to retire for a long time now. And the question was always, he was kind of being stubborn, where he was looking for the right opponent, the right match, the right response. And it kind of took for, in the middle of chaos, which is like the most ironic thing ever, is considering, my personal feelings about the Undertaker character as far as what it means to the wrestling landscape as far as the character is concerned. Not talking about the man, but the character. As far as it being we'll get into that some other time. But that in the middle of so much panic and so much chaos, he is sort of the guy who united wrestling for at least a couple of hours as being like, that's fucking cool, that's fucking awesome, what he was able to do. And it was like really only one guy that was current could do something like that. Like, Steve Austin could do it, Rock could do it, but there was only one guy who could universally get people who don't even really like wrestling anymore, or people who don't even like watch wrestling anymore, to watch this and to enjoy it. It was The Undertaker. Like, he's the one guy who could have done that during the pandemic when everybody's upset and pissed off and out of work and everything. There's only one guy who has the longevity and the interest and the name value that was still active, that could have brought people together for at least a half hour. And he was able to do it. No matter what people thought about the rest of the show, because it was in an empty arena, people raved about that one match. And I think that's what he was looking for, was, a cap to that career. This is what the entire first, couple of 4 episodes of the show is about, was him finding that moment, getting the sort of Shawn Michaels, sort of Ric Flair send-off. And he didn't really get that because he didn't get to stand in the middle of the ring and absorb that from the audience, but he was able to give it to people in a different way, and he felt good doing it. And that's the important thing, and I can really appreciate that. And that's the best thing I take from the documentary, is that he found the right opponent, which was a longtime friend. Apparently they known each other for a long time, which of course asks the question of why they didn't do this match before. Like AJ Styles and Undertaker should have been a match they did in the first 2-3 years. I get that, they could have pushed the Shinsuke Nakamura match back if they really wanted to, if we wanted to be honest, But I guess people just had to have their dream match. And of course, people also wanted, Undertaker to wrestle different people, Sting and all that type of stuff. It just never happened. But I love that it took place, and this seemed like a perfect cap on his career. So another thing I liked in this documentary was that he talked about Madison Square Garden a little bit again. We talked about when he first entered Madison Square Garden, he always enjoyed the cameras in the back, and he said he saw these pictures of Elvis and Muhammad Ali, and then you see later on that there's a picture of him in there as well. So you can tell about, how long the guy's been there, what he means to that area as far as being a top guy in Madison Square Garden in that area for so long, that now he's on the wall along with Muhammad Ali and Elvis. And I thought, like, damn, like that's badass, especially, I'm not really that big on Elvis, but that doesn't matter. Like, other people are. And, he was a top draw in music and stuff like that. And Muhammad Ali is a big time world champion boxer, fabulous stuff. And now he's on the wall. And, that's kind of meaningful, because it's the world's most famous arena and all that stuff, right? I also like the conversation that when they finally kind of got around to discussing the American Badass. Now, the American Badass Undertaker is probably, one of my favorite versions of the Undertaker. It's not my favorite version of the Undertaker is the mid '90s version, where you had from like '94 to like '97. That's like my Undertaker. Like that's kind of what I grew up watching. Was sort of an elevated version of the Dead Man. That was not the complete zombie Undertaker that was barely selling, barely did anything, but the sort of agile giant Undertaker. Because I think that's when he was at his best. From like I said, from '94. Even though I didn't really like most of the matches he had during this time, but I think that's when the character was at its peak as far as being important to the landscape of pro wrestling, of what he was doing. I think he kind of started going on a downslide when like Austin and The Rock came in. And I think this is where you should have done the American Badass. You should have done the American Badass in 1998 and skipped over the whole Lord of Darkness thing. I'm not a fan of the Lord of Darkness. A lot of people are. I just think that it was kind of a waste of Undertaker. And I also think he wasn't really in good shape during that time. He wasn't really having the best matches he could. I just imagine like if he was in 98, 99, if he was in the shape that he was in '94, he would be talking about this guy a completely different conversation. If he was the American Badass too, we'd be talking about it in a different conversation. He'd been able to actually emote more. He'd have been able to, get out there and be more of a trash talking babyface or a sadistic, mean, bully heel. It would have made more sense, man, for him to be the American Badass in '98 and '99 and 2000, and then for him to morph back towards being Undertaker in like 2002, 2003. But whatever. It is what it is. But I like the American Badass, and I like that the story of the Boneyard match was the unholy trinity, which was the American Badass, Mark Calloway, and the Dead Man. And kind of, even though it was kind of a red herring because you think he's bringing in people because AJ Styles has 3 guys, so it's going to be 3 different people. But I guess he was trying to. Another part of this documentary was about his identity and being who he is, and the American Badass is close to who he is, but it's not exactly who he is. And of course, the Dead Man is the character, and that he was merging his personalities. And of course, it's also a pretty fitting end for Undertaker to finally come to grips with who he is in his final match, and to finally challenge AJ Styles as a man, not as this character. That's, even though the character comes out at some point in the story, that it was a personal beef between AJ Styles and himself, and so therefore he stepped up as a man. And I like that. I like that story. It makes the Boneyard match so much better, so much more interesting. And it actually, there's a lot of people that have contacted me. One of my little brothers, for instance, who doesn't really watch wrestling anymore, that they kind of saw it online that he was retiring finally, and they was like, "Oh shit, I have to see his last match at least." And I was like, "Oh yeah, you're on WrestleMania 36. I guess that's it." And now there's a bunch of people, at least half a dozen that I know, that weren't really paying attention, but now that they know that he's going to retire and he's not going to be around anymore, they kind of want to see what his last couple of matches is about. So that was pretty cool. So his retirement was predicated on the idea that he almost got injured in Saudi Arabia wrestling Bill Goldberg. Now, the eyeball thing about this is, just as before I watched this episode, I saw that CBR, Comic Book Resources, put out a article saying that WCW didn't end Bret Hart's career. Bret's ego did. And in the article, it was all about, he was 40 years old at the time, and he should have taken a pay cut or wanted a pay cut or whatever. I think the crux of the idea was that he wanted more money than he was worth, and that Bret should have just, took a pay cut and done the job for Shawn in Montreal and, been a gentleman on the way out. And some of that might be true, but we know what happened with Bret. Bret would have been fine. Bret was in perfect condition. Most people didn't even know Bret was that old. And 40 is, when you're a grappler like Bret, he wasn't a high flying superstar. He wasn't, Mil Mascaris or anything like that. So at 40 was not that big of a deal. It wasn't that he wasn't going to slow down that much at 40. So we know what happened. He got kicked in the head by Bill Goldberg, and so Undertaker, his retirement is predicated on Bill Goldberg almost dropping him on his head, and that fear that I could have been hurt that started getting him to think about his family, and Kobe Bryant ended up dying, and he had some respect for Kobe Bryant, so he was like, oh shit, maybe I should spend more time at home. And that was powerful stuff. I mean, it's kind of fucked up that Bill Goldberg scared you into retirement, but it's it also reminded him that he's not of his mortal self, because he started remembering Ric Flair, his match with Ric Flair at WrestleMania 18, where him and Ric went out there and Ric just was shot to shit as far as confidence was concerned and didn't believe that he could even have a good match anymore because Ric Flair was older. I don't know how old Ric Flair was when WrestleMania 18 took place, but Ric, notoriously has confidence issues. And when people basically talk about their confidence dwindling, they talk about Ric Flair at this time. And Undertaker was in that match. He was Ric Flair's opponent at WrestleMania 18. And he was saying, like, when he was young, he didn't understand why Ric Flair, or younger, he didn't understand why Ric Flair had those confidence issues. But he says now that he's experienced it himself, the loss of strength, the loss of conditioning, the loss of response time, your body not doing what you wanted it to do, and that was powerful. Cause it's kind of like a lot of these things are starting to come around. It kind of come full circle for him. He's starting to really see where he's messed up and what's going on and what's going wrong. And he knows, that it's almost over for him, or that it is. Essentially, he says something like he has to work 10 times as hard for a quarter of the results. And I was like, damn, like, he's out there really busting his ass to give us, some of these matches. And so that was the most interesting stuff in the documentary. And, a lot of people say they wanted Undertaker to retire years ago, but I think that his failures over the last couple of years actually made this documentary. Like, this documentary would not be what it is. It would probably still be long with a lot of successes and all that type of stuff. But what made this documentary really special was that he struggled for so long to find the perfect match, to find the perfect opponent. And because it seemed like seemingly dragging his feet on retiring. And that struggle, that, seeing his confidence being shot and him not being up to par, to his own standards, let alone ours, because ours is like really probably much higher than his, and he can't, that defeat, that despair that he was going through, that made this documentary special, because that was the real vulnerability of the Undertaker, and we could not have had that if he had retired younger. If he'd retired at after the WrestleMania match with the Hell in a Cell match with Triple H, which is probably would have been a good cap on his career because it was the end of an era, would have been fine. We wouldn't have seen that. He would have been he still would have been in good shape at that point in time. There still would have been things where he would have like, okay, I'm still going on, blah, 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 blah. And we wouldn't have gotten to see the utter like fear and the utter despair of, the chaos in Saudi Arabia, the tag match in Saudi Arabia that went really bad. The Bill Goldberg match that went really bad. The Roman Reigns match, which he actually hated and was, he was humiliated, or he felt like he was humiliated, in doing that. That stuff was made this documentary special. The journey is what made it special. The documentary could have been just as good with him filled with memories of doing great stuff, but it needed that vulnerability, that confidence, that confidence for his confidence to be shot a little bit. And it's kind of crazy that but life and like art needs certain things from life, and if he was had retired on a high note and everybody would have been clamoring for him to come back, then this documentary wouldn't have been the same, But I think that because a lot of people were just kind of like, all right, it's time to hang it up. And we see why he didn't hang it up. Because he wanted, what Shawn had. And he wanted what Rick got. He wanted that farewell match. And even though he kind of gave us, 2 or 3 different farewell matches, this one kind of felt like it's going to stick, So I love the documentary series. I think that it was kind of weak in the middle. It was kind of going in circles. But I think that it ended on the high note of, if he doesn't wrestle another match, and let's be clear. He's gonna make appearances. So as soon as there's crowds again, he's probably gonna show up, because that's gonna be what Vince wants people to bring people together. To sell a couple of tickets. Undertaker's going to do something. He's going to, maybe not have a match, but he's going to do something. Maybe they're going to have a Undertaker appreciation night or something. Soon as they're allowed to have crowds, So he's definitely going to go into the Hall of Fame. I mean, he probably had the whole fucking Hall of Fame ceremony by himself. But as a big Undertaker fan, I love this documentary, and most other people should. So, what did you guys think of his retirement and in the documentary itself? Now that it's complete, like this video, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later.